Hello, welcome back to my political opinion channel. Today we're going to be talking about capitalism, what it really looks like and how it really works. So between my other videos, I've actually quite thoroughly delved into the concept of capitalism and the fundamentals of capitalism and how it works and how it differs from all of these other systems. So to be honest, there's not really a whole lot left to cover on capitalism itself. So a little bit of this episode is going to be repeated from the last two episodes, but for the most part, I'll try to keep it all new stuff. So let's go ahead and get started with the key concept of capitalism, which is, of course, laissez-faire, which roughly translates to let do, as in leave it be, commonly translated as hands-off, and it is essentially the whole concept of the free market, the whole idea of having a free market that is free of government intervention. In other words, the government is to leave it be. And this type of economic system comes with a variety of freedoms and functions that ultimately allows the economy and the society to flourish in ways that other economic systems do not. And with that, we will lead into the first major concept of free market capitalism, which is, of course, competition. So I made a little illustration like this in the last episode to explain the concept of competition a little easier. So in the interest of time and interest, I'm going to keep this rather short. But one important thing to understand is that one way that this illustration is a little bit inaccurate is that capitalism thrives on having an abundance of small businesses in the economy. This proliferates competition between the companies, but also gives the consumers and the populace much more freedom of choice to decide where they want to go and who they want to buy from. So to be comparing only two companies like this is honestly a little bit inaccurate, but just for the sake of time, we can see here in this example that the prices between the two companies don't really deviate all that much, except for on this one line item, which is twice the price of the competitor. So with this typical deviation, stores typically offer different prices, and, as we all know, a store can get by with charging a little bit higher prices than its competitors for a variety of reasons. But when you have a deviation that's this big, where it's pretty much inevitably going to go unnoticed, and people are going to realize, hey, this company's ripping me off, the people are going to start taking their business elsewhere, and the business is going to suffer for that. So that's just one example of where the populace really has the control in a capitalist economy, because the business owner's hands are kind of tied in this regard, in that he can't rip off his customers. A couple people might fall for it here and there, but in the end, they're going to have to either get a higher quality product in that will more fairly match that price, or just bring the price down to more fairly match the quality of the product. And speaking of quality, quality works in very much the same regard, where all stores are competing against each other, and if one store is just really consistently horrible when it comes to quality, be it quality of product or quality of customer service, what have you, word's going to get around, and that reputation is ultimately going to harm the company and help the populace. Much in the same way that companies compete against each other to try to create the most favorable outcome for the consumer, companies also have to compete against each other in creating the most favorable environment for employees. So this quick little illustration will show us exactly how capitalism generates this massive amount of freedom of ambition, where people ultimately have the full control to decide how much time and effort they really want to devote to their occupation. For example, most entry-level positions at least start at the minimum wage level, which at the time of the making of this video in Ohio is $8.30, so that's what I'm using for my example. And a lot of these companies may not offer any benefits packages or any incentive for workers who go above and beyond, but it's an entry-level position. These are generally jobs that really anybody can do without having any kind of experience or off-the-job training. So in other words, you really don't have to invest any effort or time into yourself in order to land that position. You pretty much just have to show up and apply. And then there are some jobs that may not really require a degree, but might require some kind of experience or training either on the job or off. But we can see that that effort and time and money spent in bettering one's self ultimately leads to a better situation for that worker, as positions that generally have more requirements ultimately have more benefits. These benefits are of course going to be somewhat overshadowed by the benefits offered by these higher up positions that require degrees. And it's mainly in these two levels where the bulk of the competition takes place for the labor. For the companies are somewhat required to offer these benefits and incentives in order to remain competitive with their competitors and actually bring in the best employees that they can. Alright, so now that we've talked about what capitalism looks like, let's delve a bit further into how capitalism works. So one of the main concepts to the function of capitalism is incentive, and this incentive comes in a variety of forms. In the most basic form, it is the incentive that separates capitalism from communism. For in a more capitalist system, everything is built on incentive, whereas in a more communist system, everything is built on the concept of coercion. In other words, in the purest, most extreme form of communism, it's either you work or you don't eat. And the main way that that differs from a more capitalistic outlook is that capitalism is built upon the concept of incentive. Somebody tells you, hey, if you work for me, I'll give you this money. Or, somebody else says, hey, well, you work for me and do the exact same job and I'll give you even more money. If you ask me, I'd rather live in an incentive-based economy. But another very important way that this incentive comes into play is from a more top-down perspective. And that is that the owners of the businesses actually have a huge and massive incentive to ensure that the business does well. Keeping in mind exactly what this means, that the business doing well means that it's serving the community well, not necessarily that it's serving the owner well. For the business is really only going to survive if the community feels the need to continue supporting it. However, if the business goes out of business, the owner or owners of that business are not only out of a job, but they're also out of whatever amount of their own personal possessions and finances that they invested into the company. So even from the business person's perspective, it very much behooves them to benefit the society and the community as a whole, rather than benefiting or bettering just themselves. On the flip side of things, the government official really only has an incentive to the taxpayer. They have to do or say things that will get them elected into office next year. Whether or not they follow through with that promise usually leaves much to be desired. But year after year, even with congressional trustworthiness being something of a punchline, government officials still retain relatively strong job security. So much like a consumer paying into a business, the taxpayer has to pay into the public treasury. Instead of getting what you pay for from the business, you ultimately get some mixture of governmental programs or action that might affect you or might not, but ultimately at the end of the day, to the official in office, it doesn't really matter, because they get their paycheck at the end of the day no matter what. If all the policies that they write get voted down and they never get signed into law, they still get paid. If all their policies get signed into law and they cause, crazy catastrophic events to take place and half the country loses their job, it doesn't matter. That official still gets paid. Those officials have essentially no incentive at all to actually do a good job. Alright, so once again, I'd like to thank everybody for watching. I hope you liked it. I hope you learned something. And, of course, per usual, I hope you don't take my word for it. Again, I always like to encourage people to go out and find information for themselves. I think a lot of the world's problems can really be accurately attributed to people just going with the flow and believing things that are not true when they really have the propensity to go out and find the truth for themselves. So, if you like my video, please leave a like, please subscribe to my channel. That'll help me out a lot, especially when it comes to creating and publishing more content in the future. And be sure to tune in next time when I will be covering my absolute favorite topic.